Hello all. In the last video, we spoke about authorization code flow. So there are 4 different types of authorization grants, out of which we spoke about authorization code flow. Just to summarize, a client makes request to authorization server for authorization code, and authorization server, it validates the request, and then it asks the resource owner to provide his consent. If resource owner is okay to provide the permission to access the resource, then authorization server generates an authorization code and gives it back to the client. So the way it gives back is it redirects to the redirect URL, and in the redirect URL it passes the authorization code. Right now, what happens after the authorization code flow? So like if you choose a first part as the authorization code, after obtaining the authorization code, what should we do? So once you obtain the authorization code, the next step that is involved is you have to talk to authorization server by passing this authorization code. Okay, like you have already got this authorization code. Now another request should be made by the third party app or the client by passing this authorization code and other parameters which we will discuss in some time. So by passing the authorization code, if client makes a request to authorization server, what it does is it will check whether this authorization code is valid or not. Did I like give this authorization code only to this client or to some other client? So all those validations are performed, and then authorization server, if everything is fine, it generates an access token, which is very important to access the resources of the resource owner, and it generates the access token and gives back the client the access token. Okay, now let's see what we should be sending in the request of the access token. Okay, yeah, let us see that. So if you see, this is the request of the author access token request. Okay, so here you should make a post call, and anyway this is the URL. Like application gives you the token URL, right? Here initially you have got the authorization URL, and application during registration itself or in the documentation, it specifies the authorization, like the access token URL as well. Now the request looks like this. You have, these are the parameters that you have to pass in the request: grant type, code, redirect URL, and the client ID and the client secret. So there are two things here. Okay, now before requesting for the access token, the client has to authenticate itself with the authorization server. So client has to pass client ID and the client secret, and then it has to authenticate. It's like saying, first authenticate me, and if I'm an authenticated client, then only you have to, it will process the your request. Okay, for that, what you can do is you can do HTTP basic authentication. So what I mean here is you can encode client ID and the client secret, and you can pass in the header. Like in the header you can pass HTTP basic, in the header you can pass that. Or if you don't need, like if you don't want to follow that process, what you can do is you can provide here client ID and client secret. Okay, so this is like when you pass the client ID and the client secret, first what it will do is, so these are the two important parameters. Okay, now as soon as you pass the client, what it does is it will check the code. Like it would have already, it already gave your authorization code, right? So it will check what is the authorization code that I gave to this particular third party app. It will check in its database. Authorization server check in its database, and what it does is it will validate, it will compare that authorization code with the code that we for like we send it here. Okay, so if both are matching, then it says okay, this request is valid. And the grant type, you should send it as an authorization code. This is by default the constant value authorization code. And one more thing is, here you have this redirect URL. So in the first request, in the authorization request, if you have sent redirect URL, then in the access token request also you should use redirect URL, and the value should be matching. So like in few cases, in the first request you already have sent the redirect URL. In the second case, you might assume, in the access token request case, you might assume, anyway I have registered my callback URL during the application client registration itself, here in the in like during the registration part, but now I don't want to send it. But that is not acceptable, because you have used redirect URL in the authorization code request, so you should be using the same thing in the access token as well. But if you don't, if you did not use it in the authorization code flow, then it's fine, you can ignore here as well. Okay, now client secret, it is like you can send it only for the clients which has the client secret. As we already discussed, client secret is given only for the confidential clients, right? Not for the public clients. So client secret, you like, if the client has the client secret, then he can provide it. If the client doesn't have the client secret, you can ignore it. But if it has, it should provide it. Okay, yeah. And in the previous video, if you have seen, I said you one scenario, right? What is that scenario? Like, if a malicious application, or if a hacker, if he can, somehow modify this redirect URL, okay, then if he modifies the redirect URL, what our application does is, it will send the authorization code to the hacker's URL. Okay, now we thought that, okay, if a hacker gets the access code, he can talk to authorization server for access token. Okay, then if the access token is given to the hacker, then he can access our confidential data, right? But here, to avoid that, even if hacker gets the authorization code, so the additional layer of security here, what they have done is, you should pass client secret here. So let's say hacker has got the authorization code, he can pass the authorization code, and since he had used his redirect URL in the access authorization code request, he will send the redirect URL as well, and he has the client ID. But since we are asking for the client secret, which is very confidential, hacker does not have the client secret, though he's like, he has stolen the authorization code, don't have the client secret, and your request will fail. Okay, so client secret adds an additional layer of security. Even though if authorization code is leaked, with the help of client secret, you can still make your application or the whole flow secure. Okay, yeah. So like, these are the parameters you have to pass, and if any parameter is missed, if anything is wrong, then an corresponding error would be thrown. Like, if if authorization code is valid only for some time, okay, it is not valid for the complete lifetime. Now today, authorization server has issued me the authorization code, and I have used an year later, then definitely it will the error response saying this in authorization code is expired. And if you don't pass the redirect URL, but you have passed it in the authorization code request, then it will throw an error saying in the redirect URL is missing. And if you don't pass the client ID, it will say like, one of the mandatory parameters are missing, and even the client secret also, it will say it is missing. Like, uh, it will say invalid request for any of the parameters are missing. But let's say you pass invalid value for the client ID, then it will throw an error. So all those error handling is still handled by the authorization server. Okay, now what we will do is, we will see the response of the access token. So this is a post request basically. So in the post, this like, we can add these things. Now, as we already said, it's better to use HTTPS, because those are all, like, whenever you use HTTPS, all the request URL and everything is encoded, so that other people can't see it. Okay, now if you see the response, this is the response of the access token. Okay, now let me zoom it. So here, if you see, it will give, this is the response of the access token. It gives you the access token in the body, and it will give you the refresh token, and then it will give the scope, and then it will give the token type, and in how many milliseconds it expires, and the state value. Okay, now if you see, we already spoke about access token and the refresh token. So access token is using this access token, you can talk to Google Drive to access the photos. Okay, but like this access token gets expired in some time. Here it is showing in 3600 milliseconds it gets expired. So after that, how can you fetch access token? Do I need to redo the process, like the starting one authorization code? Do I need to get send request for the authorization code again and then make call for the access token again? No. So like in the confidential scenarios where you pass the client secret and all, you need not do it. So what authorization server does is it will pass you the refresh token in the response as well. Okay. So what you can do is, like, you pass access token, like you request for a resource or you request for photos or any document by passing the access token. So after the token is expired, it throws you an error that this token is expired. Then what you can do is you can make call by using this refresh token. So there is another endpoint, refresh token endpoint, that is provided by the authorization server, saying like if your access token is expired, you can talk to me by providing the refresh token that is given. And this is, long lived refresh token. Refresh token doesn't have any expiry. Okay. Now, when you pass the refresh token, what it will do is it will give you a new access token. Okay. And with the help of new access token, and you can keep making, like you can keep making requests to the protected resource. Okay. Yeah. So this is the response of the access token. This is the value, and like it depends. It could be any value. It could be JWT. There are so many types of tokens, right? Like JWT, JSON Web Tokens, and it tells you the token type and expire, like in what time it gets expired. All those things. Okay. Yeah. So this is the response of the access token. And if the and like if there are some errors that had happened when like when validating the request, what it will show is invalid request. As I was telling, if any of the parameters is missing, then it will throw error, right? So in the body it will throw error description, request was missing the redirect URL, and it can give you the additional information also where you can look at the URL. Okay. Yeah. So this is how, with the help of an authorization code, you can make, like you can talk to authorization server for an access token. And what you can do is you can use an access token to access the protected resource. Okay. Yeah. And in the last video, as I was explaining, there are few consent screens, like when the authorization server validates for the authorization code and resource owner has to provide the access, right? So these are the some sample consent screens, like Google Cloud SDK wants to access your Google account. Like these are the permissions that these are the things that it will show to the resource owners. Like this third party app will have permission to so and so things, like see, edit, configure and delete your cloud data. Okay, view and sign into your Google Cloud SQL instances. So these are the things that your third party app can do. Like if you are fine with that, you can, allow it. If you are not fine with that, you can cancel it. And there is another consent screen here, like this Google OAuth 2.0 playground third party app wants to access your Google account, and this will allow this particular third party app to see your Google Fit speed and distance data. Use Google Fit to see and store your physical data. Okay, and if you are fine with that, you can allow it. So there are so many apps related to the healthcare industry as well. Like you have these Google apps where you can record your heartbeat, or whenever you walk, you can record the like number of steps you have walked in a day. So that data would be useful for the healthcare apps as well. So it will give you a pattern of your health. So for that, it needs access to your number of steps you had walked in a day or over a period of time. Or it might need access to your heartbeat, which is already stored in the Google heartbeat, Google Fitband app. Okay, so the healthcare industry app might need to talk to your Google account to fetch that data. So in those cases, these kind of consent screens will be shown. Okay. Yeah. So that's it about the access token. So we have completed the authorization code flow. Like first part is you get the authorization code, and in the second part you pass that authorization code to fetch the access token. And whenever you get access token, you can directly talk to the resource server like, this is my access token, please give me these photos. Okay, that's as simple as that. Okay, thank